Hello and welcome back. I'm going to take a look at animations in Blender. I've put some gates together, built some gates here in Blender, and what I want to do is actually work with the animations to see how these gates will react when I slide the bolt back and then open the actual gate itself and everything else. My plan is to have it, well, two ways really. One, I want to have it where I activate the trigger once I get these into the game to Farming Simulator. I activate the trigger and both gates open together simultaneously but at different rotations. So this left-hand gate will rotate anti-clockwise around about 120 degrees, and the right-hand gate will open inwards around about 120 degrees clockwise. Now I might change that, I'm not sure yet, have it so that they actually swing outwards instead of inwards, but with this type of setup, once it's actually put into game, the whole assembly can be rotated around, so it will just reverse the operation in theory. So what would be an opening gate will then obviously become an open inwards gate will become an open outwards gate, or at least that's the theory behind it anyway. Now what I've tried to do here is really important when you actually make something in Blender that you then export out into an i3D is where all your origin points are. I've spoke about this in the past, I believe, and it's really important to get those set correctly, because otherwise what can tend to work in Blender may not work as well once it gets into an i3D and you set all your animations up through various different XMLs. And also, depending on whether you're going to set it up as a placeable or whether you're going to actually import it into a map and then use the animated map object script, there will be a couple of differences on what is required and how the parts are set up. Now my plan is to make this a placeable, so this will be a placeable double gate that can be then purchased in store and placed on the map wherever, and then you'd have access to, block off a certain area of the map with a gate set up. There's lots of different placeables now, walls, fences, things like that. There are many different gates. I think Dorset has some really fantastic looking wooden style gates, but I wanted to have a bit of a mess around, a bit of experimentation to see what I could build in Blender, and then have some sort of setup. Now I have actually put some textures on this. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, Blender seems to be a bit weird with normal textures. It gives you this kind of really rough, bumpy. I think it might have something to do with possibly rendering settings in here, resolutions and various different things like that are not set correctly, that give it kind of a really weird outlook. But I'm not entirely sure how all of that works, because a lot of this stuff is only then put into actual practice once you render the object, the engine, as a solid or a material or whatever else. Your rendering viewport here, it's only when you actually render the object that these parts kind of take effect, I believe. I'm still learning so much about Blender, it's kind of daunting, at times, on what you do need to kind of tick box-wise or slide or whatever else. But if I do actually render this out, you can see this is what we kind of end up with, but it still looks kind of blocky and really weird in Blender. But again, I think that's got something to do with more of the case. I haven't selected something here that I need to select or whatever else. But irregardless, I'm not going to get into all that stuff. That's just, on my side of things. I need to figure out all of these bits here. But for what I want to do here, though, is work with animations. And I think to a degree, it's somewhat important to work out the animations in Blender and how things will react and work together to give you a better idea of how it needs to be set up in the scene graph, and what keyframes will then need to be set in various different XMLs, depending again on whether you're going to make it a placeable or whether you're going to import it into the map and then use a different script set there. So in theory, what I want to do here is have this gate, like I said, move whichever way. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go anti-clockwise on this one and clockwise on this one. So again, your origin points, where we have our set origin and where we can actually set the origin on the mesh itself or the object, is really, really important. And obviously I want this gate to rotate on its pivot point here. So I've set the origin here right on the top of the point here, whatever you want to call that. I don't know what that would be necessarily called, but I'm just going to call it a pivot point on the gate, the post, I guess. Gate. Well, this is the gate post, but yeah, wording is escaping me at the moment. But anyway, we'll just stick with pivot point, that's fine. So my gate is going to rotate. So if I go R and then Z, and I can then rotate my gate however I want to, but obviously the slide lock here is going to stay where it is. So again, this comes down to parenting and child and hierarchy and all these other different things that you need to set up. Again, one of the things that's a bit weird, or not weird, but the differences between Blender and Giants Editor and how all these different things work. What you can do here in Blender doesn't always translate through the i3D exporter directly into Giants Editor. It's the i3D exporter, unfortunately for Blender, is a little bit limited. There's so much you can do in Blender that just doesn't get taken out and put into an i3D. Animations are one of those things that, unfortunately, at the moment, I'm really, really hoping that Giants do make the i3D exporter more up to date with the similar functions that Maya, however you pronounce that, have. It's very limited. I mean, if we open this up, you can see there's lots of different things in here that it actually says it can do. IK rigging, animation, all these different things, but none of these actually work. They just don't do anything. This is literally just your GUI. It doesn't, it's, all these tick boxes don't actually, in my understanding, do anything. They don't activate anything in the actual Python coding. They're just there as a visual, but other than that, they don't really do anything, because we don't even get a shapes file when we export something out of Blender into an i3D. So yeah, it's a little bit, a bit disappointing that they haven't done that in 19, considering there are so many different, or so many more modders around that want to actually mod things, but they just can't afford, like me, can't afford the cost as a hobby to buy Maya, whatever. So we're stuck with Blender, and we just can't do the same sorts of things that others can do if they can actually use the other softwares or pieces of software. But anyway, irregardless, so like I said, I want to animate this gate and then this one, so they both open inwards, but there's going to be some changes or differences between the two, because this one would rotate. Let's say, for example, if we look at our attributes here, if I go R and Z and rotate this one's going to rotate on a positive, and then this one here, R and Z, is going to rotate on a negative. So that's really important. We need to understand how those parts all work. So what I want to do then is look at the actual hierarchy of the parent-child sort of structure, because these slide bolts I want to move with the gate. So what I need to do is kind of parent this, or put this as a child of the parent of the gate. So the gate would be the parent, and then the bolt would be, the slide lock bolt would be the child. So we need to work with what we've got here. So let's just name everything somewhat different here. So if we look at this, this is going to be front view. So I just press numpad 3 on my keyboard for front view. 9 is rear view. So we're going to go front view like this. You can do, well, I guess that's front view, and that would be side view, and then rear side view. So 1 is front view, 3 is side view, and side view front, and then 9 would be side view rear. I don't know. And then this is top view with 7. So there's a little bit, yeah, it's very complicated when you start looking at all these different things. Again, like I said, I'm still learning all this stuff, and it gets a bit confusing to work with all the other parts, but you can actually move all these parts around here. So I believe you've got your shortcuts here. So left, and then right, back, front. So I guess that would be then, in that case, this would be left, Okay, so it's, yeah, and then 9 would be right. Yeah, whatever. Just the terminology of what they use, I guess. But we're going to go with this one anyway. So I'm going to select this one here, and I'm going to rename this to slide lock left. Like so. And then this one would be slide lock right. So I'm just double clicking on the name there, and then just typing in what I want. So slide lock right, and then this would be gate left. So underscore left, and then this one would be gate right. Underscore right. Just makes everything a little bit easier to work with. And then we've got our posts. So I've actually split some things up and then rejoined them again. So I'm just going to rename that. That's fine. Okay, so if we look at what we've got here, we've got left and left. So obviously those want to be joined together. Now normally when you join things together, you actually join them so they become one mesh. You would highlight whichever one you wanted to be the kind of, again, the parent, I guess. What would end up being the fixed point, because again, it all comes back to your origins. So if you select one and then select the other one the wrong way round, then the origin would be in the wrong place, because I want to keep the origin of this gate up here, the pivot point here. So I need to make sure I select my gate last, again, in my experience, so which is very limited, to be honest with you. So I'm going to select the slide lock first, and then my gate second, and you can do that either in the 3D view or in the scene here, and that will then keep the actual pivot point correct for the gate itself. So normally when you join two meshes together, you would go Control J, and that would then join them, but then they would become one mesh. So this slide lock bolt will no longer actually be a physical object of its own. It won't be able to, you can't animate that separately. It will move with the gate, but it just won't be an object all of its own. So we don't want to do that. We still want to keep this slide lock bolt a separate mesh, but we need to parent it to the actual gate. So when the gate opens, the slide lock bolt moves with the gate. So we go Control P, and then this gives us our parent set. But what we need to do here is keep the transform in its correct positions, because otherwise if you just go Object, it won't keep the transforms in place. And again, in my limited experience, when I've played around with this, things all get a bit balked. So we want Object, keep transform, and we do like so. And now both of those parts are together. And if I deselect everything and select my gate, my pivot point is still in the same place, because we kept the transforms in the right, where they needed to be. And this one here, the actual slide lock, the pivot point is in the same place again, so I can actually slide my bolt still out and in and whatever else. But now when I actually rotate the gate, so R and Z, the actual slide lock bolt will move with the gate, which is what we want. So we need to do the same on this side. So I'm going to select the slide lock bolt first of all, and then the gate, and then we'll go Control P and keep our transforms. So Object, keep transform. So we're putting everything into a kind of hierarchy here. If we actually open up these, you can see the metal gate and then the slide lock bolt in here. So that's our parent and child hierarchy. So the actual posts, they're not overly important. They would be just for visuals. They can be put in their own sort of setup just for visuals or on their own. It's the gates and their parts that we're going to want to animate. So first of all, we want to actually get the slide lock bolt to move before the gate starts to move, and this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So what we're going to do then is we're going to work with some keyframes here, and I'm not very good at this, so I probably will make several mistakes. So what I'm actually going to do is save this first. So I'm just going to save it out just to make sure that if I do completely screw things up, I can just reload everything as it is now and start again, which I may probably have to do several times. So let's take the slide lock bolt, and we're going to work with the actual location here, or translation, what it would be in Giant's Editor. So in your XML, it would be translation, and then for the keyframe, but it's called location and rotation here in Blender. So again, there are some differences in terminology and wording, so you just have to kind of look at what you're actually working with. So this is actually going to move backwards and forwards, whereas the actual gate is going to rotate. So this would be a location or translation, and the gate would be a rotation. So we want to set a keyframe here to start with, where it's going to have this as its starting position, so it would be on 0, or possibly 1, but we can start it maybe on, what have we got here? So start frame would be 1. So again, you need to work with all these parts over here. There is one thing to note when you're working with the animations between Blender and Giants Editor. Now, I'm not 100% sure if Giants work on a 100-minute clock or a 100-second clock or whatever else, but it needs to be 0 to 1, so you complete your entire animation from 0 to 1 or 1 to 1 or whatever else, but it needs to end at 1 to complete the cycle, where in Blender it's a little bit different because it uses a real-time clock, so it's 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and so on and so on. So again, there are some differences there which need to be taken into consideration. So you can start your frame at 0 if you want to, like so, and then we're going to just basically go to 60. So we enter our frame range. This is under the render tab. So we're literally going to start our frame at 0 and go to 60 seconds, so a minute. So this entire process would end within a minute. So the first thing we want to do then is set our keyframe for the position we're at the moment. So what we're going to do then is, with the slide lock bolt selected on keyframe 0, we're going to go up to location, hover our cursor here and press I, and that locks in our first keyframe. So then what we want to do is go to about maybe 5, something like that, and then we want to move our slide lock bolt back to our open position, so somewhere maybe like that. Now again, making sure it doesn't clip into the mesh or whatever else, you just want it to be open so that it can actually then give the kind of look that it's no longer locked into position. That's all you really want there. So now we've got that, we can go back up to here and press I again, and that's now our first animation. So if I bring the timeline, the slider back, you can see the actual slide lock bolt is moving. I'm going to do one gate at a time here. So that's our position there. So now what we want to do then is select our gate, and we want to go back to the first position, and then lock this where it is. Now again, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated, working with the differences between translation and rotation. So with this one then, what we want to do is have it so that the gate starts to move after the slide lock bolt has moved to its fullest position. So we're going to set our rotation here. Our first rotation, we're not going to work with 0, we're actually going to start with 5, which is where the slide lock bolt ends. So if we now go into rotation and set our rotation at 0, let's try this. So we'll go I on there, and then what we're going to do is move the rotation to its fullest open. So we've got 60, so we want to go to about maybe 30, and then we're going to rotate this 120 on the Z. So the gate is now fully open. If we look at our slide lock bolt, it's still back all the way, so that's good. So we're going to go to here and go I. So if we now go back to the beginning, we can see that when we look at this, our slide lock bolt goes back, and then our animation starts to work. Okay, so this is really important, how you actually set your keyframes, and this will translate across somewhat into your XML and how you set all of that stuff up. So now we've got to this point here, we want to then come back where the gate is going to be fully closed, but we can't go all the way to 60 here because we want to get to a point where the gate is going to be closed and then the slide lock bolt actually goes into its close position. So we want to set this back to 0, and then we're going to do our keyframe here, and then we're going to select the slide lock bolt, and we're going to move our keyframe to 60 and then put this back to where it was before. So if you're not sure where it started off, just go back to the beginning. So we've got our y-axis, so we're going to take a copy of the y, and then we're going to go to 60, and we're going to paste that into there like so, and then we're going to keyframe it. So now if I actually come back, you can see that it's not quite worked the way I wanted it to there by the looks of things. Let's go back to the gate here. So if we go back to here, okay, so we might need to add in another keyframe here, because the problem is that where I've actually set this up, so what we want to do then is go to maybe 55, where the gate is actually fully closed, and then we want to slide this back into the open position. So if we go to here, where the open position is, and take the Y from there, and then go to 55, and then put our Y position in there, and then keyframe that, then when it gets to there, it's going to close. So we get to here, and the bolt is still open, and then it closes. So if we actually go through the entire animation, you can see the slide lock bolt comes back, then the gate opens, then the gate starts to come back round again, but the actual slide lock bolt doesn't move until it gets to here, and then it starts to move. So this is the starting position at 55, when the actual slide lock bolt will start to move into position there and finish our animation. So we then get this, which I think looks pretty good actually. That's not too bad at all. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning again. We want to make this exactly the same on the opposite side, but just reversed. So let's work with the slide lock bolt again first of all. So we'll go to this one. Now if we just mirror or kind of reverse what we've got on this side, because if we look at this side, on our Y we've got a negative, and on this side we've got a positive. So everything's going to be exactly the same, but just a positive, not a negative. So because I've set this up where everything, the numbers are all the same, as much as I could, to make it as easy as possible. So if we go to, on this one here, we go to the first keyframe here, you can see we've got this number, which basically we're going to put into this slide lock bolt, but as a positive, not a negative. So let's take a copy of that one, and we'll put that into there, but then we're going to remove the negative. So we'll do like so. You can see now this is in its open position. And we're going to then put a keyframe into that one there. What I might do actually is, let's do the keyframe at 0 first then. So let's go back to where we were before at 0. And we'll take the original number from here. And then we'll paste that into there and make sure that's a positive. So we'll then put our first keyframe in at our starting point at 0, like so, and then we're going to move it to the second keyframe at 5 seconds. So we're going to take this, so let's just take that and put that into there, and now this is in its open position, so we're going to keyframe that one by hovering the cursor over the location and pressing I. That locks in that keyframe. And we're just going to do the entire lot for this one. Now that I've set this one up, I know exactly where everything needs to be for this one. So we can go to this keyframe here, and we want that to be in the same position. So if we select this one and then keyframe that, and then we want to go to the fully locked in position again there. So I can just take that from there and put it into here, and then we can keyframe it there. like so. So now what we're going to get is the full motion of those locks working together, and you can see them opening and closing together there. They may not move, or may not look like they're moving quite as far as each other, because the post in the middle is not 100% between the gates. I used an array modifier to set the actual poles up, and it's not 100% right smack in the middle between the gates. There's a little bit of a difference between the two, but that's okay. It's not overly important. So what we're going to do then is, again, with this particular gate, we want this one to rotate in the opposite direction. So this one, if you remember from the beginning of the video here, is going to be a negative, whereas this rotates on a positive. But that's okay, again, because we can just copy everything from this one, but just instead of it being a negative, we'll make it a positive. So if we go back to the first point here, we have our 0 position. So if we select this one and then keyframe our 0 position, we'll go to the next point at 30, and we've got 120. So this one is going to be minus 120. So we go 120 negative. So that's all the way open, and we'll keyframe that one. And then if we go back to the other gate again, you can see this one and its endpoint is going to be 0 again. So we want the other one to be at 0 as well. So let's select the other gate here, and we're going to change this back to 0, and then we're going to keyframe this like so. And now if I go through the entire animation, we can see when I get to this point, both of the locks are open, and I'm going to go to the 30 point or 30 minute or 30 second mark, sorry, and they're fully open in opposite directions. And then as we come back in again, we're going to get to here, and they are fully closed, but the actual slide lock bolts are still back. And then we're going to go to our fullest point at 60, and they are closed. So that's how we work with the animations within Blender itself. And then the next one, we'll actually look at how we can work with setting all that up in the XML for Giant Editor once I get this out as a placeable. So I may actually do a video on taking this out of Blender and then setting up the actual scene graph, the hierarchy in the scene graph, on how all of those parts are joined together. But I want to keep the videos somewhat shorter and see how we work with that. So yeah, I'm ShyWizard. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.